So hello, everyone. Very excited to have you guys here today. I wanted to get started sharp right at 12 p.m. Mountain Time. So we'll have everyone starting to join in. And, I know we have a lot of people from across Canada that are going to be joining. So please feel free to, put a little bit of a note in the chat of who you are and where you're from. And so we can really kind of get a sense of the audience and who's joining us today. So very excited to have everyone here. My name is Danielle Gifford, and I run our AltaML Applied AI Lab located here in Calgary. Today, I'm going to give a little bit of a background of, women in AI and WAI. I'll go through a bit more in depth of my background, and then we'll go through the panelists and get into kind of some of the nitty-gritty questions, which I'm sure why you guys are all here today. So in terms of women in AI and WAI, as it's often referred to, it's really a nonprofit do tank focused towards gender inclusive AI that benefits global society. Our mission is really to truly increase female representation and participation in artificial intelligence. And we like to talk about kind of elevating the conversation around what that looks like. We're a global initiative, and so we have representation in chapters like this in 115 countries across the globe. We have about 6,000 members and 300 annual organized events. So with COVID, everything has moved online, and so would encourage you to definitely, check out our LinkedIn and tune into some of the events that might be happening with partners in Australia or Switzerland or Sweden, you name it. It's a really good way to kind of get connected and also kind of see what's going on in artificial intelligence across the globe. And so for a little bit of my background, a little bit in, I would say, untraditional. I've worked in and out of startup companies for most of my career in kind of the deep science and technology space. I have a background in business and psychology, and during my time working in startups, I experienced both an acquisition and a failure. So it's really kind of taught me to be gritty, to take calculated risks and kind of fail forward. And so I'm very excited to be, working here in Calgary now, working with AltaML in our Applied AI Lab that really kind of focuses on bridging the gap between academic and industry artificial intelligence, giving people the opportunity to work on applied AI problems, with real industry partners, with real data sets, and then actually make proposed initiatives to these industry partners. And so that's a little bit about me. Throughout the conversation, we're going to be moderating some of the questions. So if you have questions, please feel free to put them in the chat, and then we'll save some time at the end to actually go through some questions a little bit more in depth. So, let's kind of be active, be engaged in the chat as much as we can. And from that, I'm going to move it over to the panelists to give a little bit of an introduction in terms of, their education, their background, and what they're doing today. And so with that, I will pass it over to Tania.
Thank you so much, Danielle. Super excited to be part of the talk today and focusing around women in AI. I think that's a much needed session that we need to have and talk about these brilliant people who are bringing AI awareness and adoption. So excited to be part of the panel and excited to chat with everyone on your Q&As. So to start out with, I do have a bachelor's in computer science and master's in engineering management. I grew up in Dubai for most of my life, so I studied and got my education there. From an experience perspective, I've been in the digital space for over 12 years now, so I've seen the rise of web, the rise of apps, and now the fourth industrial revolution, what we call it as AI. So majority of my digital experience has been in the aviation industry. I've been very fortunate to work with some brilliant minds at specifically at WestJet, where we are responsible to bring conversational AI in the form of a chatbot to consumer experiences, which is a super exciting and fulfilling project, and I'm excited to talk more about that. As part of my role at WestJet, I was also involved in bringing AI to a lot of other ways of increasing conversions, increasing traffic, engagement, and whatnot. So that was something that I really learned from as we work with the different partners in the space. Currently, my role is Director of Digital Products, and I've just recently moved into the role, so it's my third week working for Rogers Sports and Media. Again, excited to be part of the team, still learning the process and the people, but really looking forward to what we can bring in using AI in terms of enhanced consumer experiences. I'll now pass it on to Ashley.
Hi, thanks, Tania. Ashley Caspen. I'm the executive director of a nonprofit organization called AI Global. And I really come to this, it's my first time outside of the public sector. So I've been a public servant at the municipal level for the city of Edmonton, and then at the federal government in Ottawa for all of my career up to this point. And in that work, I was really interested in public accountability and through the use of open government tools and data particularly. And through that interest and focus, I became the Director of Data and Digital for Treasury Board Secretariat within the Government of Canada. And in that capacity was responsible for leading the development of the Directive on Automated Decision-Making Systems. And that became one of the if not the very first government tool to be able to really consider the government's use of AI systems and the implications that they then have. And so within that, I drew on my data experience, but also got really interested in the ethical implications that these systems might have on people. Really, again, back to some of the original drivers of open government in terms of being transparent and open and accountable. The same kind of themes apply in this space. Additionally, then, once we developed this policy, I became then really interested in standards and how we actually think about implementing those for practitioners like Tania, just like knowing what good looks like. How do you follow these various different principles and rules? And so I just then joined the nonprofit world, quasi in the standards, but really what we're doing is working to organize all of those various different standards that are emerging and build them into a certification mark for the responsible use of AI systems. And with that, I'll pass it off to Jessica. Looking forward to the discussion.
Thanks, Ashley. So I'm Jessica Kaczmer. I'm a senior manager working with Deloitte in our artificial intelligence practice. I lead the team in the Midwest region, so in our Prairies region in Canada, and also lead our oil and gas analytics practice. Kind of like Danielle, I have a bit of an unstructured background in terms of how I got to where I am today. And I really actually started working with a company that created the sensors that actually create the data that we leverage today. And then had an opportunity to work for an upstream oil and gas company where we were able to take that data, combine it with a lot of other data sources like financial data, and drive a lot of decisions and analytics for various levels of our organization, from the manager level all the way up to the board reporting level. And with my experience there, I actually had an opportunity to move from industry and join a consulting firm. So I've been working in consulting now for 7 years and really working with our clients to lead them down the path of their artificial intelligence journey, from taking the data that they produce every day and driving it to make decisions, and then ultimately leveraging computer intelligence to help automate and support their data-driven activities. And really, in the spirit of International Pink Day, which is today, and diversity, equity, and inclusion, I'm thrilled to be a part of this panel with these wonderful female leaders, and really see that female leaders are driving more and more of the conversation, both in technology and artificial intelligence. So thank you. And off to Jill.
Thanks, Jessica. I didn't know about Pink Day, but I'm lucky I chose pink as our color today. So a little bit about me. I'd say I have a very unconventional way of how I got here as well. I spent most of my career in the energy sector and thinking about how we improve the way we work. Data has always been at the center of every single thing I did, from exploration to moving into things like continuous improvement. But leveraging information to make decisions and inform executives has been very, very critical to me. And so a little bit more on my experience. In AltaML specifically, we are an Alberta-based, but provide work across Canada on building AI tools and products and providing AI services. And we work with many leaders across Canada as they look to build AI tools itself. So I have an opportunity to lead many of our teams executing on the ground across Western North America. And that looks at everything from construction to energy to health to finance, you name it, some really amazing opportunities of what we've been building around AI tools. Prior to joining AltaML, I was the Vice President of Science and Innovation at the Alberta Energy Regulator, and really stood up advanced analytics and AI practices inside there and saw the power of how AI tools can materially change the way you look at regulatory landscapes. How do you use information to inform a decision in a way that makes it a better outcome for everyone? And it also removes some of the administrative aspects that many frontline regulatory or government officials struggle with. And there's a way to do that without removing the human, but augmenting the decision and outcomes for everyone. And so spent a lot of time in there on the ground leading teams, and now have the opportunity to work alongside many of my peers as we help them on their AI journey.
Awesome. Well, thanks for the introductions, everyone. I think it's great to see we all have very unique backgrounds and just types of organizations that we're representing, you know, from nonprofit to looking at commercial to also looking at consulting. And so that was really intentional, just to make sure that, you know, we're really kind of getting a good example and like good exposure to, you know, what artificial intelligence looks like in these different areas. And with that being said, you know, kind of moving into our question period, you know, everyone defines artificial intelligence a little bit differently. You know, we see it in LinkedIn, we see it, you know, maybe from our family and friends, we see it across news. And so I think my first question would really like to kind of pass it off to Jessica, but, you know, how would you define artificial intelligence? And maybe can you give an example of how you see it being applied in your work today? And from there, I'll let the panelists kind of jump in after you're done, Jessica, and just kind of explain as well. So over to you.
Oh, thank you. I get asked this question almost on a daily basis too. So really at the heart of it, and I'd say this is the most simplistic definition I can come up with, it's really the ability for a computer to perform a task or an activity that would typically require human intelligence. So if you think of anything from a robotic process automation, which is what some of us use, all the way through to an autonomous vehicle. Personally, and this is something that's near and dear to my heart, it's a product that we've been working on at Deloitte, is the ability in oil and gas, there's these engineering drawings that are very complex and require someone with a software engineering or mechanical engineering background to take a look at them and extract probably upwards of 100 pieces of data. And it could take about an hour to do this, or even longer, to pull the data out and put it into a system that would help them track their asset management. What we've been able to do is leverage some pretty advanced OCR technologies, so basically visual algorithms that help extract that information. So now when we run a drawing through this technology or this product that we're leveraging, it can pull out that information in 20 to 30 seconds. So if you think about what would take an hour is now 20 to 30 seconds with very little human intervention. And some of our clients that we're dealing with have millions of these drawings. So this is really taking a project to actually digitize all of these drawings from a couple of years down to a couple of days for them. So that's just an example from the oil and gas industry. Tania or Jill, do you have an example of when you've used this in your career?
Yeah, I can chime in. Just going back to the question around AI. I mean, I'm often asked, why now? Why AI now? Why is this a buzzword right now? I mean, it has been going on for a while. The reason it's so important right now is because you've got so much of data, which is the heart of machine learning and artificial intelligence, that there is no lack of it. We're getting data captured on every site that you're on every app you're on. So there's a lot of data there. Then just going back to Jessica's point around computing power, that's no longer a limitation. You've got supercomputers, supercomputers that are built to actually process all of this data. And then the third piece is, having the intelligent minds. Today, all of the information in terms of getting yourself equipped and knowledgeable in that area is all available online, even learning languages like Python and R. So there's just so much information available. And then there's so much of clarity right now around how artificial intelligence can be used. And that's why it is a buzzword right now and has been in 21st century. So super exciting to be part of the journey. in terms of examples, like going back to what I mentioned in my introduction around building the conversational AI bot. So when we were talking about AI and conversational AI, and we went out to our executive team, I think it was way back in 2016. They were like, "What are you talking about? What artificial intelligence doesn't make sense to us?" We really had to dumb it down for them. So the way make it work in your organization is to actually find a pain point that you're trying to solve. That is essentially the crux of any technology to be successful. It has to solve for a problem that you have within the organization. If it solves, then it doesn't need to be AI. It can be just any technology that can solve for the problem. So I think that was a real life application that we used, where we're kind of looking at low hanging fruits, where we can use data to automate some of these mundane tasks, which I'm going to speak more on as we kind of move through the panel. But that's what kind of comes to my mind, just to tag on to what you spoke, Jessica.
Happy to kind of quickly chime in here. A couple examples to give people perspective as well. If you look in the health sector, we've been doing quite a bit of work on how do you take a biopsy from an individual with lung cancer, and how do you augment the ability to identify those cancer cells that may not be able to be picked up by the human eye, and how do you take that intelligence to support it? There's lots of other examples around concussion management, around radiology reporting. As you start to look at some of the other areas in finance, a lot very well known around fraud detection, things around how do you provide recommendations to consumers. So many of you, I'm sure, bank with an app, and your bank may recommend products to you, or it may tell you how well you're doing at saving. There's AI tools in behind that. My own experience amongst those that I've identified there are things around how do we protect fish species? How do we look at air emissions and be able to understand where we're going into the future? And how do you take that future forecasting information to protect the environment on the ground today? And how does that impact your decision? And how does that impact how you come to the table, or how you educate individuals and operators? There's so many different ways, and I think many of us are very used to interacting with AI on our phones, or Google Home, or Siri, or in vehicles with reverse parking, which I know I drastically need. But I'd say there's so many other areas that it's being applied that go beyond just having a robot, or go beyond just being kind of that unhuman element.
Yeah, that I think you guys all made a really good point. And I think what we're really seeing is data is no longer a byproduct. It's really what we're looking at first and foremost, and looking at kind of turning it into a potential product in a way that we can help alleviate some of these things. And I don't know if you had anything to kind of add on there, Ashley, or if we kind of want to move to the next question, but happy to open it up to you.
The only thing I will mention is that, to Jill's point, I think that it's in so many places that we don't necessarily notice. And when we think about the vast array of how one defines AI systems, as everybody has already kind of alluded to, when you think of it being in monitors or in our HVAC systems, like for heating and cooling, you realize like it's truly integrated everywhere. And I know I'll get to this later, but thinking about how we manage or educate people around all of these things, I think is really something important that we need to take into consideration. I know we'll get to this.
Awesome. Thank you guys so much. And kind of taking a step back a little bit, we went through our introductions, and we all had a kind of this exciting kind of road path to like where we actually got to. And maybe I'll kind of hand it over to Tania, but when did you really know that a role in AI was your career choice? And what kind of excited you about this? And maybe it was something you kind of fell into, or you kind of like deliberately chose, but I'll pass it over to Tania for this one.
Yeah, no, thanks for that question. You're right. It was more like AI found me. So I can give a bit of a background. I was always like fascinated with digital trends, and being in the digital environment, you always have to kind of keep up with what's happening, what's changing, and what is it that's kind of moving the needle in different industries. So in 2017 was when I participated in AI World Forum that is generally held in Toronto. So it was obviously a physical event at that time. And I was a panel speaker in that session. And the reason I wanted to be a panel speaker was just to kind of get more information into the knowledge and get access to experts who are in the AI space. And I was just blown away, even in 2017, with how mature AI was in that space. What is the capability it brings? What is the implementation, and how this technology is being used in medicine, in agriculture. Particularly the one example that I remember was you could actually figure out if an animal is suffering from a disease by just taking a picture and using AI to kind of detect, what is it they're going through? How do you solve that problem? And then coming back to my professional world, around the same time, we are working on a project at WestJet to solve for, long wait times when you're calling in to book your flight, to cancel your flight and whatnot. So sometimes, when there are flight cancellations, especially during bad weather, the wait can be really long. It can go up to a couple of hours to like 4 to 5 hours. How do you solve for that problem? And a lot of people who are coming in have very basic questions like, is my flight on time? Is my flight canceled? What are my options? How many bags can I carry and all of that? So we're looking at various technologies to actually solve for this problem. We already had a human team that was solving for, but obviously the queue was so long that they were just not able to get to those call lines. So what we did was that we started off with just using our reach in social media. At that time it was Facebook. So we said, hey, why not just kind of launch a bot, a conversational AI bot, to be the first point of contact for these guests that we term it as WestJet, and help solve their problems. And if they're not able to, then maybe we just move it on to our human agents who are still there for support. And the way we approached it is an experiment mode. Technology was new. The executive team was on board, but we were all not sure if it's going to work out or not. So it was like an experiment where it was like a two-way street. If we succeed, then we just go all out. And if we don't succeed, then we know that we can just kind of track back. We still have our human agents to support. So that's how we kind of got the buy-in from the executive team. And the use cases that we looked at were low-hanging fruits, but high impact to business. So it should be high impact to the guests when they're calling in, solve their problem. So how many bags can I carry? That's an easy answer. You don't need to have a ton of intelligence to actually answer that. Is my flight on time? How many flights do you have for a specific route, and whatnot? So we kind of trained the AI, and when we went out to the market, we actually put out everything that you're going to be experiencing with the chatbot. So we said that she's not perfect. She's still learning. So she's like a baby. The more you chat with her, the more she's going to learn. So we set the expectation right up front there. We also were very open about addressing the unknown. So generally, when you launch projects such as these, there are like KPIs and there are metrics that you want to target. But with technology so unknown, you're not sure, what are the numbers you're going to expect. So this experiment mode really gave us that opportunity to actually figure that out, as we kind of move through the project. And that was what really fascinated me. And the other piece was that, when we talk internally about technology, specifically about AI, and the fear that it has around, is it going to replace my job? Am I going to be made redundant at some point? So the other part of the challenge was also to make sure that our departments, the contact center teams that we work with, also understand that it's actually augmenting your team. So it is almost like a digital human that's interacting. That is going to be the first defense before we actually send it out to our agents that potentially can use their intelligence and their brains for more sophisticated tasks. So that is how I entered into it, how we launched our first product, and what really fascinated me is there were just so many unknowns. We were able to experiment. We were able to learn the technology as we go, and getting the support really from the higher ups to actually go down that path. Anything else by the other panelists that you want to add on?
Maybe I'll just say I think I found it and didn't kind of go in knowing head on that AI was my career choice. But what I started to see was, how do you use data to your advantage? How do you leverage information to augment the way you do your job, or how you get to the outcome you want? There's a lot around automation that I've been doing quite a bit earlier in my career, and starting to see the power of what the potential was on AI. And for me, it was, how do you use digital tools to your advantage, and how do they help you as a catalyst to get there? And that's how I went into AI more than anything, as an exploration of the potential and the possibility, more than this is going to help me get there, or this is going to be it. And I say, think of the digital tools as a whole as a way to be a catalyst. They're not always the answer, but they can be a fantastic, fantastic way to help you get there.
Maybe I'll just add that if we made the comment earlier that AI is in everything that we do, we're all going to have jobs in AI in one way or another. And so I think that we're starting to mature our definitions enough to not have people that are claiming to be AI experts really broadly, or going into an AI field. I think that even what you're starting to hear from Tania and Jill is that each of us are kind of specializing in different aspects that are supporting components of AI. And even Tania's examples are really interesting in that you're dealing with the technical components of it, and working with technical teams, but then also having to deal with the governance aspects of convincing your organization to do that. So I think that it's really no different than, or we're all going to be exposed in one way or another. And so starting to improve or build into that vocabulary into your current roles is going to be something that all of us are going to be facing.
Oh, we can't hear you, Jessica.
Oh, I'm on double mute. I'm very good at that. So I was just going to say how I found AI, or it found me, was when I just started my career in consulting. I had the opportunity to go to San Francisco and spend a bit of time with a really cross-sectional group of people, and over brunch, because a lot of great decisions happen over brunch, I was having conversations with individuals from Apple and Google and you name it, talking about autonomous vehicles and ethical AI, and what did that mean to all of us. And at that point, I really realized that this truly is the way of the future for us. And I wanted to be a part of that conversation. And not just that, I really wanted to focus on how do we bring diversity to some of the decisions that we're making. So as we're training our computers, like training the chatbot, like Tania did, who's training them, and do we have a diversity of people that are involved in training? So it's not just one voice that computer is learning, it's a breadth of voices and cultures and background and people that are helping with that training effort. So that's really when I got excited about AI and decided to really dive headfirst into the field.
Yeah, and I would say excellent points, and kind of the same to what, Ashley and Tania and Jill were mentioning as well, is like, in terms of my background, I really kind of got introduced to it when I was working at the Creative Destruction Lab. And so I was managing a portfolio of companies across energy, agriculture, and health. And one thing that they all had in common, and that, really kind of our investors were looking for, was like, data, and how are you leveraging data? And the common thread that I kept seeing was, artificial intelligence and machine learning. And that was something that really excited me, because I didn't know too much about it, but I was like, this really looks like a technology that is not only industry agnostic and is in already a lot of the tools that we're using today, but it's going to be something that's really important moving forward. And so when I had the opportunity to join AltaML, I kind of jumped in with both feet, not necessarily having the technical training, but then also knowing that, this is kind of where the future may go, and it's something that I'm really interested in. So also encouraging people in the audience that you don't always need to know everything before you're looking to go into a role as well. And that if it is something that excites you, you should definitely jump in. And so, kind of going off of what Tania was talking a little bit about earlier is, we see a lot of headlines, LinkedIn notorious for this, and we hear a lot of buzz about AI, but we often kind of forget about the misconceptions. And so maybe what I might ask to the panelists, kind of starting with Jill, is, what are some of the misconceptions that you might hear about AI that you've seen with or kind of dealt with directly in your career, and how did you kind of talk about that or work with those?
Say a couple misconceptions, and you've already started to hear them in people's answers. One, and I'd say I'll talk from a Canadian perspective right now, because obviously different regions may be more progressive. But as you think about AI and how it's being applied across Canada, we're definitely in the later stages. And so how you're seeing AI be applied today is a lot on human augmentation of decision making. It's really not on how am I reducing this many jobs or this person's job. It is very much in early stages of how is it augmenting. And so something I just want to note to everyone is there's a power of how you become involved in work around AI that helps you understand how you are a part of it, how it could change maybe some processes that you're doing today or the way with which you're doing your work, but I don't see it materially getting rid of everyone's job. And that's a really big piece. I do think our jobs are going to shift. I wish I had something in my hand. I was reading it yesterday. It was saying 75% of many of our roles in the next decade will be interwoven with AI. And that's where Ashley was going, was around the misconception that it's going to be just this tech community, or it's just going to be these software developers or ML developers. Absolutely, they're very ingrained in their talent. Can I write code? Yes. Am I good? No. But that doesn't mean that I don't know about AI and how it could influence jobs or how it can influence the way with which people work. And I'd say whether you are an HR professional, or you're in supply chain, or a pipeline engineer, or a nurse, there is opportunity where AI is probably already interacting with you. And so understanding how it can support you and or how you use it to your advantage to be able to do your job better, faster, easier, get the decisions in a way that you want to see them, or help you get in a direction that you want to be, is probably going to be our best advantage, is how you can embrace it. And so learning as much as you can about that, the technology, doesn't mean you have to be coding and developing, but at least understanding about that is really powerful. And I think something that I know Ashley's going to touch on, because it's very, very near and dear to her heart, is we all have the opportunity and the responsibility to play in responsible, ethical AI. And the bias that can be from everywhere, from data collection to how you create models to every single thing therein. And Jessica noted on the voices and multiple voices present. I'd say the misconception is that the AI is going to be done to us. And I'd say we can be a part of that. And we also should be responsible to do it in a responsible way and understand how it's done ethically, so we can make sure the outcomes for ourselves and other generations are really held very true.
I'll just jump on with my point of view, because I work with organizations and looking at the commercial side of things. Sometimes there's a myth that AI is an unnecessary luxury in terms of the COVID-19 pandemic, because you want to just invest all your dollars in just surviving the business and keeping the lights on. But that's very far from true, right? It's an emerging platform, and it's an important enabler of cost optimization and revenue generation, and also keep the business continuous, right? In times when you're trying to save money on all of the data processing that Jessica touched on, or all the time that is required to actually read through tons of data and define trend lines, like AI can be a big enabler of bringing that to life. AI can be a big enabler in terms of cutting down costs. So the examples that I shared around having a chatbot to take those calls and be the first point of defense and not let the customer go away without getting their questions unanswered is, again, another cost optimization / revenue generation opportunity that we're going to let go if we don't think about AI. And then, as all my panelists have been talking about, right, like AI is now and is going to be the future. So at some point in time, your organization is going to be impacted. So you better be ready with a strategy on how you're going to be implementing AI, especially if you're an organization that's working with a lot of data and working with forecasting, which every organization is.
I would say one misconception that I've seen a lot is that AI is equivalent to all of the fancy technology that Google leverages, or it's machine learning, it's OCR technology. And I know we have a lot of individuals that come into our firm just out of school expecting that they're going to be playing with the latest and greatest tools. And sometimes that's the case, but a lot of the times working with our clients, it comes back to what Danielle's touched on a lot, data. And so we spend a lot of our effort really helping organizations clean up their data and manage it. Because what we really know is that if you don't have good data, you're not going to have a good outcome. You're not going to be able to implement some of the truly augmented tools that we have at our disposal for some of our organizations today. So, and again, going back to career paths in AI, it can span all the way from someone that's really great at data governance through to someone that can code in Python and some of the more advanced tool sets.
I think I'll save all of my ethical comments because I think we'll get into this, but just in terms of, so that and I think in addition to all of the various different buzzwords is common definitions. So like, what are we actually talking about? So even the role that a database administrator would play is going to be very different in a different context. And so these are the different types of things that I think decoupling or defining, and it's not, I really am not an advocate for having a strong definition of AI. I think it's all of the subsets that come from that, and having some common lexicon so that we know an apple is an apple. And in many circumstances, because it's such an interdisciplinary field as a sociotechnology, that's going to be requiring combining a whole bunch of different lexicons. But it's really, in a lot of what I've seen is, it's not about the complexity of the technology often. It's going back to what Tania said, is like getting your senior management on board. And these are things that we do outside of an AI component. It's just these buzzwords are adding a layer of confusion and complexity to it, that is made that way because I think there's often a translation that's needed.
Yeah, and kind of jumping off the translation part, I would say that's definitely a good area for people that are looking to kind of get into a career. Is a lot of times things are often lost in translation. So when we think about, communicating effectively technical information, if you're a data scientist or if you're working directly in code, like how you're presenting that information. So if we're looking at, maybe it's a confusion matrix, or maybe you're talking about an F1 score. Oftentimes, senior leadership really isn't going to understand what that means, but, how will it potentially impact their business? Or what are some certain recommendations that you might be able to make from the information that you're sharing? I think the misconceptions and how we define things are definitely kind of at a core. And I think that there's a lot of potential there. And even what I'm seeing, and especially with our applied AI lab, is a lot of, the associates that are coming in is just kind of getting that translation piece and making sure that we're all kind of speaking a common language. And, kind of on this theme, we talk a lot and often glorify the wins and sometimes understate some of the failures or lessons. And so maybe I'll pass this one off to Ashley just to kind of talk a little bit more about, where do you kind of see a gap in the industry or your work where this isn't working today? And maybe what advice would you give someone to kind of avoid these common pitfalls that we might be seeing?
Yeah, great question. I think having the discussions is really, really important, and struggling through them, because it is going to be a struggle. It's not going to be super easy, but avoiding the discussion, and whether that's just in terms of getting a clear understanding of what the objective is, or whether it is understanding ultimately what are the goals of that project, who's making which decisions when, who needs to be informed. A lot of the challenges that we saw in the Government of Canada context, and I see still in working with our various different members, is that the technical team is not talking to the business team, and within the various different technical teams, they might not be having conversations. And because of what we were just discussing, these are then challenges that are not easily addressed. And so having frameworks for what types of topics should be discussed, and then who needs to be at the table for those conversations, is something I highly, highly encourage. As Joe mentioned, that's like really my area of interest is in this responsible AI space. And part of being responsible is really just having discussions around these things that I'm talking about, but really understanding the impacts and implications of the various different systems. So I can't help myself now when people are talking about like all of these amazing different uses. I'm like, okay, but have you checked these and these and these things? And it is great. And I think, what Tania's done with WestJet is incredible in terms of coming up with ways to avoid having a queue. many of us have experienced various different chatbots, and some are implemented better than others. And Tania, I haven't used the WestJet one, so this is not a comment on yours. I'm sorry, but I've used some that I know immediately that it's a chatbot because it tells me, like, it's simple notification. So now all of a sudden my expectations are managed in a particular way. But when it doesn't tell me, or like worse, when things like voice recognition systems are going to be used as part of my banking approach, and I don't know that, but then in talking to an agent, then all of a sudden they're like muttering something to themselves, and they're like, oh yes, you've passed the voice recognition. And I'm like, what? You didn't ask my consent for those things? Like, these are, I know that I started with having discussions, like, but those are the types of discussions that need to be had, because there's a lot of unintended consequences is a term that's used a lot. And so, not to add to the buzzword discussion that we just had, but understanding the implications and then what people are doing with those are really things that can be dealt with in the design and the development phase before any of these systems are being deployed. And so that's why I think that the heart of this is having a framework to understand, again, what you need, what decisions you need to be made, and then who's going to be at the table, and ensuring that that's an inclusive table that has that end user's perspective in mind.
Yeah, I think that is very, very true. And I know I don't love when I'm doing my banking and then all of a sudden it's like, thank you for your confirmation. Kind of pulling on that thread, Tania, do you have anything to add on there, or kind of Jessica or Jill? Because I think that there's a lot where, this kind of question or that this conversation can really kind of go in terms of some of the gaps we might see.
Yes, absolutely. So one of the things, and just going back to your comment there, when we initiated, we did make sure that the users who are using the system understood that it's a chatbot. So right away, you're setting the expectations. So a lot of people who are using the system at first, and the way we framed it is like, I'm chatbot, I'm still learning. If I don't understand, I have a human team to help you out. So it's not like, you'll be left in the dark and there'll be no one to handle if you're not able to get an answer. So right off the bat, you see different kind of users. So one users, they already have that notion that this is not going to help me no matter how hard I try. So I'm just going to, just ask for a human agent right away. And some of them who do understand the technology and that it's learning and it's maturing, they actually want to give it a chance. So they are more forgiving. So we see a lot of those users as well, but totally on point, where we need to make sure that we obviously remove the biases. So one of the things that we did is, while we're training the chatbot, is we used a lot of the conversations that we had, from all of the past history of WestJet, just to make sure that we're kind of taking into account every specific situation. And there's an ongoing learning that happens. Once you put in the data set and once you define the use cases, that's not the end of it. It's always constant evolution. So there's machine that's learning obviously from itself as to how to answer the question, but there are also human agents that are actually saying, yes, is this the right thing that you're learning? Or is this something that we don't want you to learn because it's biased and whatnot? So there is always in the background a lot of work that goes on, and there are a lot of human experts and human technologies that are actually making this come to life. So it's not just technology doing its thing. It can never be. And the term I think that we use is supervised learning. So it's not just learning by itself. It's actually someone supervising that to make sure that we're kind of taking into account the ethics and the biases and all of that comes with a technology like this.
I think just adding on to what Tania and Ashley have said, I actually spend a lot more time developing products that are for use internally, so not necessarily with a retail client or someone like that. And where I see a lot of the projects that I've worked in not go super well is when you're not thinking about the end user and how they're going to be leveraging it, or then ultimately leveraging some change management practices to make sure adoption will be high at the end of it. And I've recently, over the last couple of years, spent a lot of time learning about a new upcoming science. It's called decision science. So what it really does is it combines data science and social psychology and behavioral economics and a variety of topics that at the end of the day really focus on how does a person make a decision and how can we help them make that decision? And that's really taking into account a lot of the data science principles, but then adding in that human layer to say, okay, what drives an individual? Do they make decisions off of a gut feel? Do they make it using data? And how can we start to transition that to allowing people to feel comfortable with making decisions leveraging data in the future? Jill, did you have anything to add on to that?
Oh, always lots to add. I'd say that as you look at, and really where I'm drawn is the pieces that Ashley has said, and I maybe I'll put a point out for Ashley and AI Global. There is a thing around a design assistant that can take you through thinking about every single aspect of how you look at having responsible and ethical AI. It is far, far greater than one person. You have to think about, how do I integrate my client or end user or the machine learning developer? What are all the things that we all need to think about bias and ethics? How do you identify, assess, and mitigate being a really critical piece? Like Jessica, we do quite a bit for internal clients as they think through how they would work with it. And as she alluded to, change management is critical. What we also see is this thing called explainability. And you'll probably hear that in the market as well around AI. How did the model create that? How did you get to this decision? What data went in there? And I think explainability goes very much in hand with also being able to make sure you've mitigated bias and you've done it in an ethical way. And so being able to articulate how you created it also helps you in a senior leadership space, because your executives are not going to understand things like Danielle mentioned on F-score and many of those pieces. They'll have no clue. And it's how you can explain to them, which is the same way that you should be able to explain to your consumers and yourself in making sure you're aware of it. And so something to think through, whether you're building AI or you're being interacted with it, is how do we start to question? How do we start to question what's been used, how it's created, and make sure that we're holding each other to account inside that space? That's definitely, I think, a really big piece for us to continue to grow as a society around AI.
Kind of echoing the point of explainability, you know, something we do in terms of when we're looking at candidates potentially coming into the lab is we ask them to explain one of their favorite algorithms to their mom. And so it seems really silly, but like, how would you kind of like break that down, or maybe explain like supervised learning or computer vision? And that's where I think a really good step is to kind of like practice is that explainability side of things. Talking a little bit and pulling on the thread that Jessica was mentioning around, you know, adoption and change management. Some of the biggest gaps that I see in terms of organizations as well is, you know, people think that, you know, I'll just hire a data scientist team, or I'll add a data scientist there and like, it's going to work. We're going to sprinkle some AI on it and like, boom, we're going to get what we need. But, you know, a lot of it really kind of comes in the problem definition and, you know, how are we going to potentially use this prediction? And how does it fit into our solutions? How does it fit into our existing architecture? You know, what is really kind of that workflow? And I would really say it's a whole organizational approach. You know, everyone has to be on board in terms of, if you are looking at AI, it can't just be having this AI arm that sits outside the company. Like, it really needs to be embedded in the way that you think about innovation and change management and adoption. And that's where I see a lot of large companies today, like kind of starting, I think it's the Ever Given. Like, that's a great example of being stuck in the channel of like trying to start to shift, you know, towards how you are using AI and how your company actually looks at it. And the change management part is really, really big. And I actually haven't heard of decision science, Jessica. So that is something that I'm going to look up as well. And as we're kind of getting towards the end here, I think a really important question, you know, and I'm sure a lot of people in the audience are curious of, as we're kind of looking at, you know, our careers in applied AI, is just kind of, you know, one piece of advice that you might give to someone that is looking to pursue a career. And I think, you know, looking to pursue a career in AI it doesn't make as much sense as much now, because like AI is kind of in a lot of things that we would do. But if you guys could give one piece of advice to someone in terms of how, you know, they might approach, or if it's looking at learning, what would that piece of advice be? And maybe I'll start with Tania on that, and then we can kind of go around the panel.
Yeah, I think the first piece, if you're starting your career in AI, is to actually understand, you know, like it's like an AI 101. understanding what AI is all about. It's like having sessions like this, being part of these conversations, right? What does it mean in different industries? What are the fundamental algorithms look like? What type of problems can you solve with AI? It's not like AI is a solution to every problem that's out there in the market. Every time, we come up with a problem and then there is someone pitching in to use AI, the first question we ask is, can we do this without AI? Like, do we really need to use the technology? So I think those are the things that you really need to understand is what are the basics, what are the fundamentals before you actually deep dive into learning and applying that to your business. Anything to add on, Jessica, Jill, Ashley?
I just add on, and I know Jill's just posted a link to it. There's a lot of really great, relatively inexpensive courses out there. So Coursera, LinkedIn Learning, that you can really get the basics and then just start to expand, because like we've talked about here, AI is a range of activities. So it's really finding what interests you, whether it's going down and learning how to code in R, or learning about data management, or really learning how to be that data translator from a business analytics perspective. And then I would also just put a shout out to Alberta. The U of A and the U of C have some absolutely phenomenal programs, whether it's data science or business analytics, that I would highly recommend for anyone that wants to take a more academic route towards pursuing a career in AI.
Jill, go ahead.
You go.
I think that I put a couple of links in the chat, but I would say, again, it really depends on where you want to start. And there's so many different avenues that you can go down. And so if you are really talking about building AI systems and that more technical route, then there are those formal education options. But don't think that, oh, I'm not technical, as I've noted some of the comments, and I therefore am disqualified from this space. As I've been mentioning, there's a lot of different perspectives that are needed around the table. And even though I was talking about it from an ethical perspective, obviously ethicists are in high demand in this space right now to help guide those discussions on those different trade-offs. But just being a subject matter expert in how that tool or technology is going to be applied, and getting some additional information, and often it's just language in order to communicate with some of the more technical people on the team about what those implications are, will be helpful. So unless you want to take a complete left turn in your career and do something else, great. All the power to you. There's lots of great avenues for that. But just think about how you can expand in your current role even and augment some of your education and knowledge. And I posted a link to, we've put a community portal with a lot of different types of resources in there. And it's based off of really what we come across on a regular basis. So similar to, because I was interested in building open government portals before, this is kind of my answer to that. We'll continue to populate that, and there's definitely a lot of great reading in there.
Maybe to round all that out, I'd say, I know there's many individuals on the call that are already kind of very technical in AI, but I'd say for others that aren't, or others in your lives that are interested, you don't have to be the individual building the models themselves. Many AI and technology companies have all the other roles that from controllers and finance teams and many other support mechanisms. It's more around, how do you bring your knowledge and what drives in, what's your passion, what do you want to do? And if you want to get into AI, how do you do that in a way that really stands behind your values and the way that you work? And how do you do it in a way that you can bring that value point? And so it may not be that you're the one doing hands-on with the code, but it's really on how do you want to make a difference? And I'd say that's been a big piece for us, is we work with a lot of organizations and partner with them, and a lot of companies and people coming to us and saying, I have a really great idea. I want to do something. I know nothing about technology. I know nothing about AI, but I think there's a problem here we can solve. An example of this is veterinarians. So of course, trained very much in that very distinct discipline. Tania alluded to vet health early on. And we actually built an app called Tably. It's on the iPhone App Store now, but it started as how can we take a picture and see how happy your cat is? And so the reason I'm telling you this is I think everyone has a role inside of being a part of technology. And so this was a little bit of a work with veterinarians to see, could we see and identify that? Because cats, we know, are very different than dogs and other species. At times they hide and it's very hard to tell. And we've evolved this app to be able to take real-time pictures to identify the health of your cat, remote monitor it. Veterinarians are prescribing it. It's interestingly enough that cats' faces change, their hair structure changes, things we can't pick out, but a computer can. And so just really interesting around, even if you have an idea, find somebody that can help you through that. You don't have to be the one on the ground, but knowing the tools, the technology, the concepts will help you make a pivot in your career, help you have a conversation, and at least educate you on what's happening around you so you can be more informed. And I think that's the biggest piece, is learn about the technology that's surrounding you so you can understand how you want to be a part of it.
I think that's a great way to end off, Jill. And I know internally, a lot of our teams have been looking at if we could have something like that for our kids, or if we could have something like that for dogs. So I think, you know, just that curiosity is very important, and you're not going to know everything in the space. So don't always feel like you have to be a domain expert. Don't feel like you have to, especially when you're applying to jobs, don't feel like you have to check every single one of the boxes. It's really important to, you know, kind of take control of your destiny and really kind of believe in yourself and your capabilities, and you can learn along the way as you go. And I found that's been something that's been really essential to me in my career. The other thing, which I think is really important, and everyone here on the call will probably know this, is just really get involved in the community. There's a lot of great things happening. There's hackathons, there's different types of groups. We have a really strong community here in Calgary. And even if we're talking about, you know, with women in AI, it costs nothing but your time. And I think it's a good way to even kind of get your feet wet to see, you know, is this something that I might want to be involved in? And I would say, you know, I like amen to the panelists. You guys have done a great job answering all the questions. So I don't think we have any kind of questions that are left in terms of from the audience, but I just want to, you know, thank everyone so much for their time and for being with us here today. And we'll kind of continue to add on more events as we go through, but just keep that curiosity and keep kind of thinking, you know, don't be afraid to kind of jump in with 2 feet. I think that's something that's important. And if we don't have anything else from the panelists, I can kind of end it from there, but I see Tania, you might want to add something in. But over to Tania, and then I think we can let everyone go for the afternoon.
Yeah. No, just saying thank you so much for setting up this session, Danielle. I think it's been really helpful based on some of the comments that I'm seeing. We're able to, you know, answer some of the questions, burning questions around what if I'm not an expert? What if I don't have a technical background? I think what COVID has done is accelerated this learning, right? Like you don't have to be physically present in any of these conferences. You can just access this at the comfort of your own home if you have got a computer and an internet. So yeah, just going back to your point, like use these free courses, free seminars, webinars that you can attend just to get to know more and see if this is something that would interest you in the long term.
Yeah, awesome. And yeah, big thank you to Jill, Ashley, Tania, and Jessica. I can only imagine how busy your schedules are, and thank you for taking the time and the energy. And yes, comfort of your own home beside my liquor cabinet, which we might get to later tonight. But yeah, thank you everyone so much. Looking forward to hopefully staying in touch with you guys, and have a wonderful, wonderful afternoon.
Thanks for having us.
Thank you.